It was supposed to be the beginning of her new life. But just 6 weeks after her wedding, 19-year-old Layla Rahmani was discovered in a secluded area, her remains unrecognizable. Authorities were left with the most chilling question. Why did her husband, the very man who had promised to cherish and safeguard her, betray her in such a devastating way? Layla Rahmani was born into a conservative Afghan-Australian family in Sydney, Australia. Her parents, originally from Kabul, had strong ties to their cultural heritage. Though they had fled war and persecution, some customs followed them into their new home, one of them being arranged marriages. Her father, Omar Rahmani, was a strict and traditional man who believed that his daughter's future was not hers to decide. Layla's mother, Soraya, had been a child bride herself and saw no way out of the cycle. Despite living in a modern city, Layla grew up under rigid rules. She was allowed to attend school but was discouraged from making non-Afghan friends. Her curfew was strict, her clothing was scrutinized, and any expression of independence was met with harsh reprimands. She often dreamed of escape, of a life where she could breathe freely, where she could attend university without fear, where her choices were her own. She would imagine herself in a courtroom, defending the rights of the oppressed, standing tall in the face of injustice. But as her 19th birthday approached, those dreams began to feel like illusions. She noticed the strange silence that filled the house whenever she entered a room, the abrupt end of hushed conversations between her parents and their closest relatives. Her mother's eyes were constantly red, as if she had been crying in secret. Then, one evening, the announcement came. She was to be married. It was not a proposal, it was a declaration. Her fate had been decided without her consent. She looked at her father, searching for some sign of warmth, but he remained impassive. Her mother avoided her gaze. "It is time," her father said firmly, his voice devoid of emotion. "You will be a wife. This is what is best for you." Layla's heart sank when she learned who her husband would be. Farid Kazemi was not just a man from their community. He was known for his aggression, his past altercations, and the rumors of his violent temper. Yet none of it mattered. The marriage was a transaction, a deal sealed behind closed doors, with her future as the bargaining chip. She begged. She cried, but her pleas were ignored. "A daughter's duty is to her family," her father declared, his voice cold and final. "You will learn to love him." Her mother, who had once been forced into marriage herself, turned away, unable to meet her daughter's tearful gaze. Layla felt her stomach churn with dread. She was nothing more than a pawn, her future traded like a commodity. That night, she contemplated running away again. But the bruises from her last attempt were still fresh. She had been caught before, dragged back home by her uncle and cousins, locked in her room with no food for 2 days. Escape was a fantasy. We truly appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more shocking true crime stories. 2 weeks later, she stood in a grand wedding hall, her face covered in elaborate bridal makeup, masking the hollow terror in her eyes. The guests cheered, unaware that they were celebrating the burial of her dreams. And as her new husband, Farid Kazemi, took her hand in his iron grip, she knew this was not the beginning of her life. It was the end. Layla was bright, ambitious, and deeply immersed in Australian culture. She dreamed of becoming a lawyer and had even secured a scholarship to a prestigious university. But her dreams came to a screeching halt when her father, Omar Rahmani, informed her, "You will marry Farid Kazemi. You will do as you are told, Layla. Your wishes do not matter here." Her father's words weren't merely a suggestion. They were final, non-negotiable. She was given no chance to refuse, no room to argue. Layla had heard unsettling whispers about Farid, stories of his volatile temper, his past violence towards women, his entitlement that bordered on cruelty. She tried to voice her fears, but her father's stern glare silenced her. "You will obey," he said, his voice unwavering. "Our family's honor depends on it." The engagement was rushed, as though the family was eager to rid themselves of a burden. Layla's pleas fell on deaf ears. Even her mother, the woman who had always tucked her into bed as a child, looked away, unwilling to defy tradition. The walls of their home, once a place of refuge, became her prison. On the night before her wedding, she tried once more to escape. She managed to sneak out, making it to the dimly lit streets of western Sydney, but she didn't get far. Her uncle and cousins, already suspecting her intentions, found her before she could reach safety. They dragged her home, bruises forming under their tight grip. "There is no running away from destiny," her uncle hissed. The next day, she stood at the altar, a vision of beauty to everyone but herself. Beneath the layers of makeup, her expression was vacant. As Farid slipped the ring onto her trembling hand, a single thought consumed her. This was not a wedding. It was a death sentence. Farid came from a wealthy Afghan family, one with deep roots in the business and political sectors of their expatriate community. He was known for his arrogance and his quick temper, but to Layla's family, he was a good match. The Ramanis were struggling financially, their small restaurant business on the brink of collapse, and it was whispered in the community that Layla's father had accepted a significant amount of money in exchange for his daughter's hand. What no one knew, however, was the full extent of the arrangement. The deal wasn't just about money, it was also about debt. Omar Rahmani owed Farid's family a substantial sum, and Layla's marriage was the price of his freedom. Farid had been engaged once before, but the woman had mysteriously vanished before the wedding, her family abruptly relocating overseas without a trace. There were whispers of something sinister, but no one dared to question a family as powerful as the Kazemis. Now, with Layla trapped in the same fate, the walls began closing in on her, and she could feel the weight of a dark history that no one had dared to expose. Layla begged. She pleaded. She even ran away to a friend's house, her hands trembling as she knocked on the door, desperate for refuge. For a brief moment, she thought she had found safety. But safety, as she learned, was fleeting. Her uncle and 2 male cousins stormed in an hour later, their faces dark with rage. They didn't speak as they grabbed her by the arms, their grips bruising her skin. Layla screamed, pleaded for them to let her go, but they carried her out as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. The neighbors watched, some with pity, some with judgment, but none intervened. Thrown into the back seat of her uncle's car, she sobbed, her body shaking uncontrollably. The drive home was silent except for the sound of her own panicked breaths. When they arrived, her father was waiting at the doorstep, his expression unreadable. Her mother stood beside him, her arms crossed, eyes cold and distant. "This is your duty," her mother said, her voice void of emotion. "Your honor is tied to your family. You cannot shame us." Layla's heart shattered into pieces. She realized, in that moment, that there was no one left on her side, no one who would fight for her. She was utterly alone, and the walls of her home had become her prison. And so, with tears in her eyes, Layla walked down the aisle in an elaborate wedding ceremony attended by hundreds of guests. She looked like a princess, but inside, she was dying. Farid Kazemi was not the husband Layla had hoped for. From the moment they moved into his family's home in the western suburbs of Sydney, he controlled every aspect of her life. What started as silent disapproval over her westernized habits quickly turned into a strict regime of obedience. He dictated her daily routines, when she woke up, what she wore, whom she spoke to. Even her diet was monitored, as he insisted she adhere to his mother's strict expectations of a perfect wife. Layla was no longer just a bride. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Farid's family supported his oppressive behavior, believing it was their duty to tame her into submission. His mother would chastise her for the slightest mistakes, calling her ungrateful when she hesitated to serve tea or shameless if she spoke too freely. His younger brother mocked her dreams of studying law, laughing at the idea of a woman wanting independence. Soon, the walls began to close in. Farid confiscated her phone, citing his right as her husband. He installed cameras in the house, ensuring she was under surveillance at all times. The house became her prison, and his temper, her warden. Layla learned quickly that resistance meant punishment. One evening, when she refused to attend a gathering with his friends, he locked her in a dark storage room for hours. The isolation, the fear, it broke something inside her. But the worst was yet to come. Her life was not her own anymore, and deep down, she knew it never would be again. She wasn't allowed to continue her education. She wasn't allowed to leave the house without his permission. Her phone was confiscated. She was expected to obey him in every way. If she resisted, He reminded her that she was his property now. The control tightened with each passing day. Farid installed cameras in the house, watching her every move, ensuring she had no means of escape. The windows were always locked, and even when she was allowed outside, she was accompanied by his mother or his younger brother, acting as her silent guards. He controlled what she ate, whom she spoke to, and when she could sleep. One evening, after she refused to follow his command to serve his guests, he made an example of her. He struck her so hard she collapsed, her ears ringing, her vision blurred. She gasped for air as she lay on the cold floor, her cheek pressed against the hard tiles, tasting blood in her mouth. Farid stood over her, sneering. "You belong to me. No one, not your family, not the police, no one, will ever help you. You are mine to do with as I please." His guests watched in stunned silence, some shifting uncomfortably, others smirking at the display of dominance. No one intervened. No one told him to stop. Layla tried to crawl away, her body aching, her mind screaming for escape. But Farid wasn't finished. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her upright. "Apologize," he demanded, his voice eerily calm. When she hesitated, he tightened his grip, dragging her toward the dining table. "Apologize for embarrassing me in front of my friends." Tears streamed down Layla's face as she choked out the words he wanted to hear. Only then did he let her go, shoving her toward the kitchen like a discarded rag doll. She bit her lip to keep from sobbing, her body trembling. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, something inside her shifted. She realized she could no longer hope for rescue. If she wanted to survive, she would have to save herself. When she tried to call her parents, her mother's response was chilling. "This is a wife's duty, Layla. You must endure." She was trapped, and with every day that passed, she felt her soul withering away. The abuse started subtly, verbal insults, belittling comments, silent treatments, but soon it escalated to physical violence. At first, it was a shove when she hesitated to obey. Then it became a slap when she spoke out of turn. Over time, the bruises on her body told the story she was too afraid to speak. Farid's cruelty had no limits. On nights when his temper flared, he would yank her hair so hard that strands of it would fall onto the floor, a reminder of her powerlessness. He would push her into the walls, kick her if she cowered, and lock her in their bedroom for hours when she resisted his advances. The bruises she tried to conceal with makeup grew darker, but the scars that ran deeper were the ones no one could see. One night, after she refused to serve his friends drinks at a gathering, he threw a glass at her, the shards cutting into her skin. As she bled onto the floor, he laughed and told his guests, "This is how you teach a disobedient wife." They chuckled uncomfortably but said nothing. No one would ever say anything. Layla's cries for help were swallowed by silence. Every time she attempted to reach out to her parents, her mother's response remained unchanged. "Be patient, my daughter. A wife must endure." Layla's mother, when she managed to secretly call her, responded coldly, "Stop complaining, Layla. This is a wife's duty. You must endure, just like I did." Her closest friend Zara noticed the bruises but was helpless. One day, during a rare and brief moment alone, Zara clutched Layla's hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Leave him," she urged. "Come with me. We'll figure it out together." Layla's eyes welled up with tears. "I can't," she choked. "They'll find me. You don't understand. He won't let me go alive." Zara hesitated before slipping a small burner phone into Layla's trembling hands. "If things get worse, call me. No one will know." It was the first time Layla felt a flicker of hope, but even that hope was dangerous. But Layla had nowhere to go. On the night of August 14th, Farid's neighbors were jolted awake by a terrifying noise, furniture crashing, frantic shouts, and then a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the silent street. Moments later, an eerie silence took over. No more sounds, no more movement, just a void of nothingness that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. One neighbor, an elderly woman living next door, hesitated at her window. She had seen bruises on Layla before, had heard muffled cries on countless nights. But fear and cultural barriers kept her from picking up the phone. In their tightly knit community, domestic disputes were private matters, not something to interfere with. As the minutes dragged on, the silence stretched unnaturally long. A door slammed, a car engine revved, then darkness swallowed the night once more. But the horror was far from over. A neighbor, peeking through the blinds, noticed Farid struggling to load something heavy into the trunk of his car. It was large, wrapped in what appeared to be dark plastic or fabric, and he was sweating profusely as he lifted it. He looked around cautiously before slamming the trunk shut and speeding off into the night. Hours later, security cameras captured him pulling into a deserted industrial lot on the outskirts of Sydney. He remained there for nearly an hour before driving away. What he did during that time, no one could yet prove, but what police would later uncover would shake the entire country. 3 days later, when Layla was reported missing, investigators pieced together the timeline, tracing Farid's movements. Their breakthrough came when a group of hikers stumbled upon a freshly dug grave in a remote bushland area, the ground disturbed, an eerie stench wafting from the site. Inside, forensic teams uncovered what remained of Layla. Dismembered, unrecognizable, her hands and head missing. What monster could do this to his own wife? What was he trying to hide? And more importantly, where were the missing body parts? The investigation was just beginning, and the dark, twisted truth was yet to be fully uncovered. As detectives combed through Farid's financial records and digital footprint, a disturbing revelation emerged. Layla was not his first victim. Before Layla, there had been another wife, one whose disappearance had been quietly dismissed by her family back in Afghanistan. Further investigations revealed disturbing patterns. Multiple reports of domestic abuse, each one retracted mysteriously. Witnesses suddenly refused to talk, and past accusations against him had never seen the light of a courtroom. The deeper the police dug, the more horrifying the case became. A forensic search of Farid's laptop uncovered encrypted files containing disturbing evidence, photos of Layla taken without her knowledge, chilling audio recordings of their conversations where he threatened her life, and messages detailing how he had planned every step of his crime months in advance. Then came the biggest shock. Layla's missing hands and head were finally found, hidden in a storage unit Farid had rented weeks before her murder. The evidence was irrefutable. This was not a crime of passion, but a methodically planned execution. Nobody called the police. Domestic violence was a private matter in their community. It was only 3 days later that Layla's family reported her missing. Farid told them she had run away, that she had been unhappy and left in the middle of the night. But his story didn't add up. Layla had no money, no phone, and no known place to go. Her family, though deeply ingrained in tradition, knew Layla would never just disappear without a trace. She had been obedient her entire life, always adhering to her family's wishes. Her father, initially reluctant to involve the police due to shame, finally reported her missing after her younger brother insisted something was wrong. When the police arrived at the Kazemi household, they found Farid strangely calm, offering them tea and showing no concern for his missing wife. He repeated the same story, claiming she had been unhappy and had left of her own free will. But detectives weren't convinced. As they searched the house, they noticed something strange. A faint but undeniable smell of bleach lingering in the bathroom, the grout between the tiles looking freshly scrubbed. Forensic teams were called in, and under a specialized light they found traces of blood near the drain. It had been cleaned, but not well enough. Something terrible had happened there. It wasn't long before more inconsistencies in Farid's story emerged, and police began their hunt for the truth. The case that would soon rock the nation was just beginning. Police launched an investigation, and within days, the horrifying truth unraveled. Layla's dismembered body was found buried in a remote bushland 2 hours from Sydney. Her head was missing, her hands had been cut off. Whoever killed her wanted to make sure she was unrecognizable. The police didn't believe Farid's claims that Layla had simply left. CCTV footage showed his car leaving the house at 2 a.m. on August 15th, the same night the neighbors heard the screams. But what truly sent shivers down the detectives' spines was what the footage revealed next. The cameras captured Farid returning home an hour later, his clothes visibly soaked. As he stepped out of the car, he hesitated, looking over his shoulder before dragging what appeared to be a heavy duffel bag from the trunk. Further analysis of traffic cameras revealed his vehicle traveling toward an isolated stretch of highway known for its dense forests and abandoned industrial sites. This footage, coupled with Farid's sudden purchase of industrial-strength cleaning chemicals, plastic sheets, and duct tape from a local hardware store just hours before Layla's disappearance, painted a horrifying picture. Detectives secured a search warrant for the Kazemi residence, where forensic teams uncovered tiny blood splatters in the bathroom and traces of Layla's DNA embedded in the carpet fibers, despite an apparent desperate attempt to clean the scene. As evidence mounted, Farid's alibi crumbled. The final breakthrough came when police retrieved deleted footage from a home security system nearby, revealing Farid struggling to carry an unidentified large object out of the house, one that matched the shape of the duffel bag seen in the car footage. This was no disappearance. This was premeditated murder. Forensics discovered traces of Layla's blood in the bathroom, despite a desperate attempt to clean it up. And then, the most damning evidence: a hardware store security video showing Farid purchasing an axe, garbage bags, heavy-duty cleaning chemicals, and a large roll of plastic sheeting just hours before Layla went missing. Surveillance footage captured his expression, calm, methodical, showing no sign of hesitation. When investigators searched Farid's phone records, they found an even more chilling discovery: multiple searches on how to dispose of a body without leaving evidence, how long it takes for human remains to decompose, and the best methods for erasing DNA. These searches were conducted days before Layla's disappearance, proving that her murder was no act of passion. It was premeditated in the most calculated way. Further damning evidence came from receipts found in his car, showing that he had also purchased industrial-strength rope and a new set of knives. His internet history revealed orders placed for large, airtight storage containers, none of which were found at his house. The mounting evidence painted an undeniable picture. Farid had meticulously planned every detail of Layla's murder, leaving no doubt in the minds of investigators that he had always intended to kill her. Farid was arrested, but he denied everything. He insisted Layla had disgraced the family and had run away. But the evidence was overwhelming. Police found a hidden message on Layla's old phone, which she had managed to send to Zara before she died. "If anything happens to me, it was Farid." The courtroom was packed. Media outlets covered the case extensively, with feminists, domestic violence advocates, and cultural leaders weighing in. The trial exposed the dark side of forced marriages within immigrant communities. Farid's defense tried to paint him as a man pushed too far by a rebellious wife. "She disrespected me," Farid claimed in court. "She wanted to shame me in front of our community. I had no choice." They claimed Layla had threatened to run away, that she was unfaithful, and that Farid had acted in a moment of uncontrollable rage. His lawyers depicted him as a man caught between the pressures of his strict cultural upbringing and a wife who refused to conform. They even attempted to introduce messages from Layla's family, claiming she had often spoken of wanting to leave Farid. However, the prosecution tore apart these arguments piece by piece. They presented chilling forensic evidence that showed Layla had been subjected to prolonged abuse, with signs of old fractures and scars hidden beneath the surface. The court was shown harrowing footage of Farid buying the very tools used to dismember her body, his expression eerily calm. The most damning piece of evidence came in the form of voice recordings recovered from Layla's secret burner phone, smuggled to her by her best friend Zara. In one of the recordings, Layla could be heard sobbing, whispering in terror, "If anything happens to me, tell them it was him." The courtroom was left in stunned silence. Any pretense of Farid acting out of momentary rage was destroyed. He had planned this, every single step. The jury took less than 5 hours to reach their verdict: guilty. The prosecution, however, had irrefutable evidence. The jury listened in horror as forensic experts detailed how Layla had been brutally beaten, strangled, and then dismembered to cover up the crime. Farid's cold demeanor in court did not help him. It took the jury less than 5 hours to reach a verdict: guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Layla's story sparked a nationwide debate in Australia about forced marriages and domestic violence within conservative communities. Her parents, once defenders of tradition, publicly regretted forcing her into the marriage. Zara, her best friend, now works with women's shelters, vowing to help other young women avoid Layla's fate. But for Layla, it was too late. Her dreams had been crushed. Her life had been stolen. And all because she said, no. A question to the world. How many more Laylas must die before families put love over honor?